Welcome to the Maintainable Software podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, Paola Ducolin, who is currently a staff engineer at Datadog. Paola joins us from Paris, France, one of my favorite places on the planet. Paola Ducolin, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you, Robbie, for having me.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Well, I have the counterexamples of what it feels to have unmaintainable software. So I go with a counterexample, and the maintainable code is code that flows. It just flows, so it is well documented. People understand quickly how to add feature, how to refactor, how to change it. And if they break the code, there are tests that automatically detect it. So changes never impact the customer.
Well, that seems simple and straightforward. Why do you think teams struggle with this?
Well, because you don't always have the time to do your proper duty in writing code that is maintainable, because life, because business pressure, because business opportunities that jump in and change the plan. So I also understand that there is a need to go fast and to perform fast and to deliver fast to the customer so that you can deliver the features that are requested sooner than your competitors. So there is a lot of competition in the tech industry. But then it's very hard to justify spending time on refactoring with the stakeholders.
And do you think there's throughout your career, have you found that there's some good approaches to how you can work with those stakeholders to help them understand the importance of, like, hey, we shipped something, we knew we needed to get out the door quickly for our customers, and now it's there, and now it's some time has passed, and this is starting to slow us down. We're nervous about making changes. We need to go back and revisit some things. What sort of approaches have worked, or do you maybe also have some examples of things you had tried, or you've seen, or you've witnessed other developers experiment with that maybe did or did not work?
I have example that worked and example that didn't work. What did not work is saying we need to refactor these because we are going slow, or we developers are not comfortable with touching the code. Because from the business perspective, they don't care, right? Or not always do they care. Because what business wants is to deliver features and to deliver as many features to cover as many customers as possible. So what matters is measuring. So for the counterpart, what worked, for example, when I was at Ducolin, there was a huge refactoring operation on the Android app. I was on Windows, but I saw my colleagues on Android. And what they did was they started by introducing static analyzer for unsafe code. And that detected a bunch of issues. I don't know, 1,000 issues. And from there, the technical leader discussed with the CTO and with the stakeholders to agree on having some time allocated over time. And I think they agreed over 1 day per week to spend on these legacy code. And they measured the impact. They also measured the impact, and it was on the number of crash that we detected in prod. And that is something that the stakeholders care. And that worked. That worked smoothly. It took them time because, when you see a bunch of unsafe code detected, you would like to act on them right away. So you have to compromise. But that is something that worked.
Hey folks, it's me, Robbie. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus, they're certified ISO 27001, and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. I'm curious about the challenge that, software engineers might have of trying to find some meaningful metrics, because maybe, you talk about maybe number of crashes that might be happening in production or bugs happening in your web application, whatever project you're working on. And those are things, it's like, well, we're reducing the number of bug fixes. And was it because we addressed some technical debt, or were we just merely fixing bugs? And do stakeholders sometimes understand the difference there of like, well, are we writing buggy code, or are we writing maybe non-ideal code that gets the job done for now, but we need to revisit it? And so I think there's that challenge that developers might have of just trying to be able to delineate the differences for the other people, because I would imagine most project or product owners and stakeholders aren't saying, hey, cut every corner you can as a developer to get this thing done fast. They probably are expecting you to do a pretty reasonably good job of making smart choices for them. And so there's this interesting kind of challenge, well, do you find that developers are more often just making those trade-offs and while they're developing, and do you feel like they need to be doing more to share what trade-offs they're making as it's happening, so that it's later not so much of a surprise to a product owner, like, we shipped the thing on time, but I didn't know that we cut all these corners? Or what have you seen? What's your experience been?
So there is a bit all of that. Sometimes there is some ignorance of good practices, or there is no good practice that is explicit across the company. And that is true, especially for early startups. If they don't hire from the beginning an experienced developer, that doesn't mean that junior developers don't know how to code, but experienced developers might have seen things and might have stumbled in issues. I don't know, like race conditions, or like race condition are my passion and my nightmare, or way to write healthy code that more junior developers might not know, especially if they went through like a regular, like a standard learning career. So if they went through university, I don't know over there, but I went in Italy, and in Italy, university is very about theory, and there was no mention of like good practices or readable code and so on. It's more about like learning how to do a bubble sort than learning how to write it in a way that the next reader is going to be able to understand what that is doing.
That's interesting. Yeah, admittedly, I didn't go to like computer science. I don't have a computer science proper degree or anything myself. But what I do know from talking to different people is that I think teaching people to write well-maintained code, or how to dive into older code bases when you start a job, you very rarely get to be the person that starts the project from scratch. Maybe you do if you're at some brand new startup or something, but most companies are hiring people, engineers, to join them to help them with a project that is already in production, already been worked on for several years. And so kind of leads me to one of my next topics I wanted to discuss with you, which is, can you share your philosophy on how to approach software development, knowing that the code that you're working on today will need to evolve and be maintained by other people that you may or may not ever get to meet?
There is one point that is that to me I see a lot, is the broken window building effect. If you see code that is unhealthy, you're probably gonna write unhealthy code, because it just melts well with the environment that you are on. And if you see code that is very, well tested, well organized, with clear guidance, you're gonna stay in the rails, and it's gonna stand out if you don't write well commented or well documented or well explicit code. So I had the chance to work both on new projects and on legacy projects in different times in my career. What I do when I start a project is to, well, my philosophy about it, I believe in the power of documentation. And it could be code that is self-documented, so that is readable, code that has comments. There is this great talk by Sarah Drasner that is the heart of code comments that I recommend a lot. And that I see like probably coming from Uncle Bob, clean code. People are not very into writing comments because, your code should be self-commented and whatever. Like whatever works, but make it work. Um, and then documentation. One pattern that I see recently in front end is the design system. And the design systems are a great example to me of well documented and maintainable code. And I would like to see more of that out of the front end. And that is something that I try to evangelize also here at my company.
It's interesting you bring up thinking about design systems. Do you think that there's something about the nature of what those might look like because there's a bit more of a visual representation of what I might be making an assumption, but are we talking like, here's like, if we want to use this component, our application, and here's the color palette that our organization uses, and so we can use these different components throughout our applications, and we can, if you're building a form, here's kind of like how that approach looks, and like here's how we always do a date picker thing or something like that. Do you think there's something about the fact that there are some visual representations where not all areas of a code base can often have a visual representation, because it's like, here's some code or here's some example way to use this part of the code, but sometimes it's maybe it's like more about the data architecture, or how these things connect to each other, or APIs and endpoints and stuff like that.
So there is part of the visual of it, but most of it is the documentation of it. So you have a library that is usually you have a library that is searchable and that is well documented and that you can copy paste. I don't know if it's true across all the design systems, that the design system that we have here at Datadog, we have live code that you can edit, so you can see the changes, but that is only front end. But what I really like is that I can copy paste the import and the code, and I paste it so I can copy and I can paste it in my code, in my app, and voila, that is done. And I see, like, out of front end, I see a very also hard time in devs in accepting copy paste. They're like, oh no, we're doing duplication.
Yeah, that was going to be my curiosity, is that do you find that some developers struggle with that because it's like we have the same type of components showing up very, very far reaching many, many, many times. I'm air quoting duplication because there's probably some uniqueness about each of those. So is there a counter to that you're like, where your team's like, no, we can do this, but like the concern that they might have is, well, like in 2 years when we change the design, to change or make some updates to our design system, we're going to have to go back and make 50 changes for every one of these things. Is that actually that complicated, or is that a problem? Or is it a hypothetical problem?
To me, it's more of a problem to have custom implementation of the same things across the product. One, because it is inconsistent for the customer, so there is impact on the customer. And if we talk about the backend, imagine that you have part of your, like all of your apps that at some point are sending data. So they have like a forwarder for payloads. And imagine having 20 implementation of it across repositories, because maybe you don't have even a single repo. And imagine having, I don't know, a security bug or wanting to change the base library. So you have to do it 20 times. If you have a component, so it really must be business agnostic. So the hard part is that you have to design well the components so that they are business agnostic and they are atomic enough and molecular enough to be reusable and to be easy to change, to be easy to move around.
I appreciate that. And maybe just take a quick moment for, I don't want to, just quick 101 on, for any listeners who might not be familiar with Datadog, but can you tell us a little bit about what Datadog service offers?
Yeah, so Datadog is a cloud monitoring SaaS that offers observability and alerting over infrastructures and apps. We have like a bunch of products from server and Kubernetes. I don't know. I never know how it's pronounced. I hope I did it right. Or
That's how I pronounce it. I don't know if it's right either.
okay, so it's Kubernetes. So for cloud and on-prem monitoring, so collecting logs, metrics, events, and then we have all the platform that so the app where customers can configure their alerts and get paged when things go wrong, and for example, measure the impact of your DevX team on the refactoring by measuring the impact, for example, of crashes or the velocity of features deployment.
I'll definitely include links to Datadog in the show notes for everybody. I'm assuming most people have probably heard of Datadog, but I just wanted to make sure that maybe there's one person out there who's like, I don't know who that is. If you don't mind, what part of the ecosystem of all the different, I'm assuming that's a pretty big platform and a lot of probably different types of teams. Where do you kind of currently fit into the part of the organization?
So currently I'm on the agent. Agent is a software that runs at customers and that collects the data and that uploads them to our backend. And I'm specifically on agent developer experience. So what I worked on over the past 1 year and a half, couple of years, is framework to test the agent as a black box. So end-to-end testing, but just around the agent, using the same language that our developers use for writing their unit test, so Go, but installing the agent on any possible platform that we support.
We'll be back with our interview with Paola in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. I just wanted to say thank you for making time to listen to the podcast. If you're finding these discussions valuable, please pop over to social media and share a link to one of your recent favorite episodes, maybe this one. You can also pop over to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. Be honest. You can, if you're not sure what to write in the comment, just say, I enjoy Robbie as a host. I really enjoyed that episode with Paola Ducolin. Robbie's a terrible host and made me do this. Also, is there someone you think I should interview on the podcast? Shoot me an email to robbie@maintainable.fm. And now let's get back to our interview with Paola Ducolin. Make sure I understand that you're working on things related to if someone has a Ruby app or a Python app and they install that agent in the gem or whatever package into their app so they can send you metrics about what's happening in the application and whether there's errors or logging and things like that. And so you're working on the stuff that's related to just the agent for all those different variations, or just the experience of collectively? Do you have smaller teams for each of those, or like individual people working on each of those kind of different programming language ones?
Yeah, I think we have around like between 100 to 200 engineers on the agent. And so we have, because it's super complex, because it must support like a bunch of platforms from all the variants of Linux, all the distribution of Linux, plus macOS and Windows, and then containerized environments, build all the variants. So for example, I don't know, Docker and ECS and ECS VM or EC2, or ECS on Fargate, and then Kubernetes. And then, so this is like the core. Well, already inside the core, there are a bunch of moving pieces, and then there are the products that work because of the agent, thanks to the agent. So you have, the core part is like logs and metrics, and then you have the integrations. So for example, you have the security integration that will detect if there is a nasty code running on your server, and that interacts with the kernel. And you have NPM, network performance monitoring, that it also interacts with eBPF and the kernel eventually, that detects, like it monitors the networking of your server.
Oh, interesting. Kind of tracking everything. I'm not sure how long you've been part of the software industry. Approximately when did you join the industry?
So I've been in the industry for a bit more than 15 years.
Do you feel like for people joining the industry now, you may or may not have a strong opinion about this, but do you think it's more difficult or easier for developers to join the industry and wrap their head around all the different things just outside of just their own, the project that they're working, but all the tooling that we're now using in our software projects to track and measure everything? Do you feel like it's harder, or is it more complex to kind of wrap your head around how all these moving pieces fit together?
I will say it depends, and that shows my seniority. So the great advantage that I see today is all the resources that can be found for free. So back at my time, we had to like buy books, and they also were like very unreadable book, I will say, or like thought for a very academic path. And now, like, I love how many, well, your podcast, for example, or how many YouTube content you can find, or the online content that like all the blogs. I think there are a lot of new resources and for free. So they are accessible also to people that are not privileged, or they don't have the privilege to go to computer science universities. On the other part, there is a lot. So it's very hard to understand, like to make a plan. And back in my days, you go to university and there is someone that did a plan for you.
And you just kind of follow along, and there's a process there. You make a good point about how content is so much more accessible, educational content, and learning how to do things. And I sometimes wonder if that is like overwhelming for some. I don't know what it's like to be like the curse of knowledge, right? I don't know what it's like to come into the thing and be like, I'm curious about making a web application, or I want to build an app for the phone or something. I want to make a game. Like, where do I start? It just probably seems like it could be overwhelming too. And then to think about like, okay, when I actually want to deploy my code, what's involved in that? And I think maybe I'm over romanticizing the old days. I'm air quoting the old days of just being, it was simpler then, but I don't know that to be true. Maybe there was just a lot less. You could just follow the book to some degree.
There is also something else, that is, there are lots of platforms that reduce the effort, for example, to deploy a website. Like back in my days, you had to like set up your whatever HTTP server was. Yeah, you had to go that far. And now you have Netlify, you can not even, you have GitHub. You can directly like you copy paste again, your action to deploy your website, and it's done. So something I see that can bring to some like not going into deep understanding how things works, and that is counterproductive because you don't know, you are less critical on the tools that you use.
That's true, and I think it also sometimes, and not to, I think copy pasting is a wonderful thing to do. I do it all the time myself, just to be open about that. But I think when everything kind of like seems like magic, when you're like, I just put some stuff into GitHub Actions and things get deployed to some other thing, it can be really difficult to debug things when you don't really understand what's. So I see sometimes where we get called in to help people. I work in consulting, so we'll get called in to help people, or I'll be helping a junior developer work through a thing, and then like trying to debug something, and I'm like, oh, this is. And they're not really sure where to try anymore, because it's like there's all these layers of things that could go wrong, and they just see a weird error message, and Stack Overflow isn't giving them the answer or whatever. And then I might sit down to pair with them on it for a little bit, and then we'll figure it out. I'm like, oh, it was a weird DNS thing, and they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, don't know, like how can I learn more about that? And I'm like, ooh, I don't know. That was just something that I learned over having to deal with building all these pieces myself over the years, that I understand how DNS works. So I knew how to test these things and like what's going on in the process. It may have nothing to do with your code. It could be a completely different thing. Like GitHub Actions is down. That's why it's not pushing it. It says it did it, but it didn't. And let's go test that. So anyways, switch topics a little bit. Another thing I was really hoping to speak with you about is I found one of your blog posts from a couple months ago about your journey to becoming a staff engineer. And I'll include a link to that in the episode notes for our listeners. But could you talk to us a little bit about how you and your manager, one of the things I liked about your blog post was that you talked about you and your manager started together at the Datadog, I think, on the same day, and how you collaborated on thinking about what role were you, or what level developer were you hired for, and what was that plan look like, and how was it executed?
Yeah, so I was coming from a staff title and staff role at my previous company, and was hired at Datadog as a senior engineer. That is because at Datadog, like the scale of the problems are much bigger than what you could see at most of tech companies. So there are a bunch of like GAFAM companies that might have the same scale of issues.
So just to recap that part, you at your previous position at a different company, you were a staff engineer there, but Datadog, did you apply it as a staff engineer, or they say, well, you're not quite there here yet, but we will help you get there? And was that a, if you don't mind sharing, I'm just thinking for people that are looking, like what was that process look like for you?
I'll be honest, Datadog, at least in Europe, the salary scale is different from the other companies at least in the French market. I'm based in Paris, and they will offer you basically less responsibility for more money, and with the possibility, of course, to grow in the career. But nobody guarantees that it's gonna work because it's a different environment, it's a different set of problems, and you might not be a good fit for those problems. That is fair. There is a risk that I decided to accept. And from there, I was hired and I started the same day as my manager. So we both had no context of how the process to grow to staff, so the let's say the political process to grow to staff worked at Datadog. And I made a joke out of it, but I think it's partially true that my biggest achievement was finding out how it worked to get to the staff position. Because there is a lot, like they put a lot on words that can be vague and can be blurry, and that is partially on design. Because when you're a staff, at least at Datadog, you have to be capable of figuring things out yourself. So the biggest difference that I see, well, there are many different, but if you're a senior at Datadog, you might act as an architect, for example. So you might have that level of technical complexity, but you don't have all the responsibilities or all cross-team interaction that a staff needs to have. What happened was that we both, so myself and my manager, started this investigation, and the most of it was networking. So getting to know people. That might seem weird because, the biggest misconception I had was that if I did my job well, then I would get my promotion. And if I show that I was good enough, I would have my promotion. And actually, being a staff engineer, being an IC, like in the IC ladder, it's not about being an individual in your corner and doing your stuff. Or it's very hardly that. It can be that if you're a super expert of one technology that nobody else in the world knows about, and then you are the go-to person, and yes, you might be able to do your research in your corner. But most of the time, you're rather a coordinator. So you move projects that have impact that I don't know if I like that word, but basically you come with an energy and with a power to influence decisions that can move inertia that has stayed there for ages.
That's interesting. I hadn't really, I work in such a small company, and we don't have any, say staff engineers specifically. Probably people doing some stuff like that at times. But it's an interesting idea around you're coming in to these situations. Or as a staff engineer, are you kind of, and maybe it might be very different in different organizations, but where you're currently at Datadog, are you kind of getting called in to kind of float around different types of areas of the, or you kind of right now, you mentioned where you mentioned that you're kind of working on the developer experience agent side right now, but you're coming into these situations. The expectation for that role is to come in and bring energy to help move decisions forward, help unblock things. Teams might be weighing up too many different options, and maybe someone just needs to be like, let's try this, or what sort of what does it mean? Is it to come in and say, just stop it, just do it this way, and just be very decisive, or is it coming in and helping people, being a good question asker and helping people make decisions themselves, or is it a bit of everything?
Yeah, it really depends on the person, and it's a bit of that, and yes, it's really the person that moves things forward. And I think you also saw across your experience, project that just slowly stopped at some point because nobody cared. But that could have an impact for customers, like eventually. And that is a kind of project that like a staff engineer will take and bring onto to production, especially if there are a lot of teams involved. If you don't coordinate all of them, then it's a mess. I did an example. Last week I was at a meetup in a local community of staff engineers that just started called Staff 42. I'm gonna do the commercial for it. And so we did this meetup, and there was like this discussion and around like what staff means. And yes, it can mean 1,000 things, and there is a lot of extra hype probably around it. But the figure of image, I don't know, like the image that I thought about is when you sail. I don't know if you're familiar with sailing, but when you sail, like you need someone that decide the direction and that adjusts the direction depending on the wind. And if you don't decide like which side to go, and then you can sail because like you don't follow the wind, or you don't set a direction to the wind, right? And that is how I feel it for a staff engineer. So they bring the direction, and also they adapt the direction to the wind and to how things works, and they make people work together so that the boat can sail and reach the target.
So are they the ones keeping an eye on the tailwinds and saying prepare to tack?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I'm curious back to like just maintainable code in general. So I'm curious at what point are you maybe think about your current team or somewhere, what's an effective way to organize the things that you know you should probably address? Do you find that it's been easiest to just throw them in some sort of backlog of like, we'll call this I'm air quoting technical debt, or pain points, things we want to address at some point? And how do you think about prioritizing that when your organization does give you budgeted time to work on those things? Like, how do you think about how to prioritize that list?
Yeah, so I use a backlog, and it's interesting because like I add things as they come up, and then I prioritize them based on the impact that they have on the solution that we provide. So we do internal tooling, so we don't have direct customers impact, but our customers are other devs, and I decided priorities based on how frequent, for example, a bug it is, or a flake in our test frameworks, in our test framework comes up. And eventually you'll find that some of the backlog is going to disappear because at some point you just change the implementation of a bunch of things. And so you just remove a bunch of broken features or like not perfect features. So yeah, I strongly recommend against going like directly and fixing everything, because life is not perfect, and also like the nature of life is we all change and requirements change. So you have to adapt rather than you cannot control everything basically.
Is that a list that you often collaborate with other people on, or is it kind of something that's at your purview? And how do you think about like collaboratively prioritizing things together as a team?
It's a team effort, and well, DevX work requires feedback. So the priorities are either things that we see because we measure them. So for example, I don't know, issues. I'll give you a very practical example. In the framework that we support, that we maintain, we deploy, so we create an instance of, for example, a VM remotely on AWS. That's just an example. And this deployment can have many things that fail, because you might fail creating, I don't know, the subnet, or, there are a lot of pieces that works together to finally SSH into the host. And so one thing that we monitor and that we acted on like literally this week or last week was fixing the errors on the deployment part. So before the test starts, the actual functional test start, fixing that first part. So we started monitoring how many of the tests that ran on the CI were failing because of that specific part. So we started by, again, measuring. And another way of prioritizing is by collecting feedback by all the devs. So getting the opinion so that it also helps engaging them in the conversation and showing them that you care for their opinion, you care for improving their experience. So that builds like this relationship of trust. So yeah, this is how I prioritize the work.
Hey again, it's me, Robbie. I just want to take a moment to plug my own company, Planet Argon. Do you know of a company that has a Ruby on Rails application or a suite of Ruby on Rails applications that have been maybe collecting some dust, some technical debt, a bunch of legacy code, a lot of staff turnover, and engineers are afraid to make updates to it because they're afraid they're going to break something that someone else added to the project years ago and they don't understand what this one dependency is? Send them our way to planetargon.com. We help organizations with existing Ruby on Rails applications make them better and more maintainable. Here to help you get to take advantage of some of the new features coming in the next versions of Ruby on Rails. Again, planetargon.com. Send them our way. Let them know that Robbie sent you. I sent you. I sent you to my own company. Let me know that you listened to, and I said talk to Robbie at Planet Argon. Just get in touch. Planet Argon. Let's get back to our show. No, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing a little bit of behind the scenes there and how you're thinking about that over at Datadog in particular. For those listening that might be part of a much smaller organization, smaller team where they don't have a lot of, maybe more than a few teams, if not more than even maybe one team, and they're kind of responsible for taking care of the software project that they're working on, deploying it, the infrastructure, kind of all, collectively within, their team. Do you feel like you have some experiences or things, any recommendations you can offer them on how to think about how they could do something similar, even if it's at a much more smaller scale?
Yeah, well, the measuring part, so adding observability, to your product can help a lot so that you can prioritize by addressing the things that are most impacting the customer. So, for example, again, the number of crash or the number of a certain issue that you know, because I think that is the way software should adapt, is to the customer needs rather than to the developer's feeling of healthy and flow.
No, that I think that's some good advice there. Also, for those listening, there's a lot of observability tools out there. Obviously, check out Datadog and compare all the different platforms out there that offer kind of similar-ish. Every one of them has their own kind of unique take on that approach. One of the things I would like also ask you about, Paolo, is like if there's someone listening and they feel like there's some stuff that's really only impacting them, and it's maybe not customer facing. It's more maybe there's some stuff that's really slowing them and their productivity down, and they're maybe not able to find a direct correlation. Like, well, if we improve this, it'll help the customer, or it's going to help maybe it's just going to make my life better as an engineer. And I've asked for some time, a few times, to the product stakeholders and said, hey, can we get I need a couple of weeks to work on this thing, or give or take. And they've said, not right now, a few times. And they've stopped asking, in that sort of scenario with like, well, if they don't care, I don't care anymore, but they do care. And so do you have any advice on how they might rethink that approach at least one more time before they dream of maybe just finding another job one day where I'm air quoting, the grass is going to be greener over there and they'll have no problems like this?
That is hard and that is frustrating. What I guess it's on the finding a compromise. So it's really about finding the way. It requires a lot of energy, but finding a way to explain to people that don't know what it means to code on the day by day, and explain, have a vision, show the vision of where you could get with that work. So, for example, if you see a company that is struggling at there must be some external signal basically, and you have to find the signal and push on that with the stakeholders. So it might be we are very slow at delivering features, or we deliver features but we have a lot of issues and customer support. So in either way, so in the first case, it will be like we can deliver X way faster. So you start measuring how fast you deliver new deployments to the customers. Or you have issues with customer support. So you measure how many customer supports you receive, and you start by addressing that
That's really good advice there. I think for those listening, you can go through and find some ways to be like, we're just running, we're slowing down. We've been slower. And I would be surprised if a developer is working on a team that feels like they're delivering things much slower. I'd be really shocked if their product owners didn't also feel that way, and they might be frustrated and maybe not able to articulate. So it might be a shared thing that this is not working. So this is something we need to do. I think your advice there is really good. And you can even, the compromise thing, be like, depending on your relationship with other people, be like, I can't keep working in this environment. You can always say that too. And put it, not say, make it a threat, but at the same time, it's like someone else will have to come in and deal with this at some point. So we can make it better for me and whoever else is on the team today, but also this is going to make it easier in the future when you bring in someone to replace me, because I will leave one day. That's, I think, back to the earlier topic of like, you're going to be working on projects that someone else that you may or may not ever get to meet is going to be responsible for. And so that's part of your legacy, I suppose, too, is how you've made impact on the project.
That some devs are comfortable with, because it's good to feel important and to feel like you're the owner. Yeah, so totally on that. And also, like as every negotiation, finding a common goal.
Couple of quick last questions for you. Is there a non-programming, non-tech, non-software book that you find yourself recommending to peers that you maybe work with, or just peers in general that recommend that they read?
Yeah. So one, and it helps with like negotiations and with discussion with stakeholders, is Radical Candor. That really helped me with providing feedback, that help me and help growing, like building the relationship that are based on trust, and that helps a lot, like with them, like influencing and getting room for improvement and getting room for working on refactoring and legacy. And the other, Crucial Conversations. That also.
Noticing a trend here.
Yeah, but I do believe that engineers, devs, they have a very hard time at explaining like their feelings and like getting comfortable with their feelings. And well, you see it online, you see it also surely at work, that you often engage in technical conversation, like technical debates, that soon become very personal. Like example, code reviews. So you're asked for a code review, and the reviewer provide you some suggestion in code. Many times, I don't know the percentage of time, you're gonna feel that as an attack, like a personal attack, and that should not be that. Like, it's just code. It's not part of your identity, and there is a lot of work there. So yeah, these kind of books can help there.
No, that's great. I often think when it comes to pull requests and the advice around that is, I think we put a lot of energy into talking about coming up with a good pull request template that your team all consistently uses to some degree, and if we follow this approach, then that makes it easier to send it to someone else. And then we try to give some guidance to people on how to give a review, to review a PR. But I think that's where sometimes we drop the ball, and we forget to then be like, now how the next lesson is how do you avoid overly internalizing the feedback that you got on the PR, and then how do you respond to that, or do you just go, I need to walk away from my desk for a few minutes and question my career choices, when it's supposed to be about the code. And that there's this whole interesting kind of dance that a couple people are participating in about the code, and and so it's just an interesting thing to kind of navigate. So definitely include links to both of these books you mentioned, as both Radical Candor and Crucial Conversations. You're not the first person to recommend those books on the podcast. So if people are listening and have not picked up either of those books, this would be a good time to do that.
They should, yeah. And there are also a lot of, there is online content. I think there is a TED Talk for both.
Okay, if I can track that down as well. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering online?
So I have a blog where I sometimes post articles, like from time to time. I stayed stale for 2 years or 3 years while I was trying to figure out how to get to stuff because all my energy was there. And now that I achieved that level in the game, I have more energy, so I'm back to writing a bit, and then on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
Great. I'll include links to all those places for our listeners in the show notes. And with that, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Paula. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us.
Thank you so much, Robbie.